My name is Roma. This is Zimlove, a podcast about Zimbabwe. Here I'm sharing interesting stories through people that I've met and want to show you a side of this country that an internet search cannot. Enjoy.
It's dishonest to marry somebody that you don't love. It's dishonest to marry somebody you don't love. In Greek, that is not so. It's not modest to be looking around and falling in love. Not if you're old-fashioned, if you had old parents. Maybe they fall in love now. But it was sort of frowned upon to be creating a new romance and stuff like that.
Welcome to this episode of Zimlove. My name is Roma, and today we are talking about the Greek community here in Zimbabwe. I would like to welcome Tass, coming from Anastasia, Tass. We met through the aunt of a friend. Tass, I did not meet during my social time in Zimbabwe, but I really was hunting her down, recruiting her to be on this podcast. So I'm very happy that it worked out this time. Welcome, Tass. Welcome to Zimlove.
Thank you.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
I was born here, and I was basically a teacher. I taught French and Latin for 25 years in a high school. And as far as I'm concerned, that's who I am, or who I was.
Where and when were you born exactly?
I was born in Mutare on the 2nd of December in 1933. And in those old days, we lived on a farm. You did not wait till it was time to have your baby. A mother expecting would go to town and hire a room in her 8th month. You could not sit on the farm and say, find the cattle and yoke them to the wagon and let's get to the siding and wait for the train from Harare to take us to Mutare.
Mutare is Mutare today.
Mutare today, yes, Mutare. So my mother was taken to the maternity home by a friend in town. Mm-hmm. She had to be in town for a month, for the 8th month, while she waited for the birth.
And when did your parents come to Zimbabwe, and from where?
They came separately as two unmarried people. They both came from Kefalonia, but not from the same part of Kefalonia. And in all probability, if they had been in Greece, they might not have married each other because they were very insular there. They say, oh, that's from another village. He's from another village. But once they were here, it was a fellow Kefalonite, as we say, people from Kefalonia have that togetherness. And Kefalonia, as you may have picked up from your other friends, was never under the Ottoman Empire. We had French people there, we had English people there, we had Italians for about 100 years. So the people in Kefalonia will sometimes throw in an Italian word as part of their vocabulary.
And when exactly did they come?
My mother's father came in 1910. But he left the family behind until he could get himself established here. He brought the family only in 1926. So my mother came in 1926. My father had not found employment in Greece until the age of 27, and then he decided to come and find a brother who was here. And so he came in 1924. And he ended up farming. He went along to a coffee house. There's always a Greek coffee house somewhere where the men gather and catch up on things. And he found a place on somebody's farm. He worked as an assistant to begin with, until he was able to put some money down and get a farm of his own.
I read about this actually, the coffee houses.
Yes.
So there was already a Greek community.
Well, there were already Greeks here, yes. There were Greeks. As I say, my mother's father was here from 1910. And my father came only in 24. And there were others that were earlier. I think that some of the earliest Greeks that came were big game hunters. They came to shoot lions and stuff like that. They had not come with a view to settling, but some of them did settle in the end. But as I mentioned earlier, there was a charter company interested in this little colony here, and they had seen that it would be suitable for tobacco, and they had invited tobacco growers from Greece to come and grow tobacco here. But my dad did not come as a tobacco grower. His father had been making feta cheese in Greece.
And are most people that are here in Zimbabwe now, are they also from the same area, from Greece?
No, they come from all the islands, and we are completely representative, I think. And each one comes along with the customs of their own island. So as far as our church proceedings are going on, we get more and more confused because this is the custom there and that's introduced here, and then that's the custom over there and that's introduced here. So we end up doing all kinds of extra things for our church. And we still are quite insular. We are all Greeks when you're putting us against the English population. And we use the word English loosely, whether people are Irish or Scotch or Welsh, we say English people. And the others will just say we're all Greek. But in the meantime, we've got, first of all, a Greek community that includes everybody. Until recently, it didn't include women. It was just for men, backing down from old days. Then the ladies created their own association. And then the Cypriots have got their own association here. And then you've got, from Kefalonia, we've got our own Kefalonian association. So we still break up into our little communities as much as we've always liked to do that. The Cypriot community is the largest one out of the Greek-speaking people. It's very simple if you know why. Because Cyprus was under British control, and all the Cypriots had a British passport. And with a British passport, they could go to any British colony without any fuss about coming as an immigrant. They were already British. We had British passports, those of us who were born here, in southern Rhodesia and in northern Rhodesia. And you must be aware that we went through a period where we were Federation of the Rhodesias and Nyasaland. And that went from 1953 to 1963. I started working in that period in 1955. I wasn't necessarily aware that we were now the Federation, but it was a period of booming activity in Salisbury, as the capital was called. Buildings were going up like mushrooms, you know. And then the Federation ended in 1963, and the other two colonies became independent. Nyasaland became Malawi, and the other one became Zambia. So we were just not northern or southern Rhodesia, we were just Rhodesia at that point.
And the Greek people that were living here, how were they looked at by
everybody else? I personally was astonished to hear Greek people say that we were treated as second-class citizens. I never, ever had that impression. But my circumstances were different. I was alone on a farm. The neighbors on that side were Afrikaans people. They kept themselves to themselves. They weren't anxious to come and speak English to anybody. And then the other people over there were English. And they were different from us because my parents spoke English as a foreign language. And then I went to a convent in Mutare, and the foreigners outnumbered the English girls. This was a convent of Dominican nuns, and most of the girls were from Beira. Some of them were Portuguese. They were all Catholic. The Portuguese were Catholic. It was a school for Catholic people, but they accepted Greek children. So some of the other children were Greek, some were Portuguese. The English were very much in the minority.
Mm-hmm. So you would say you didn't feel
I never felt that I was a second-class citizen at all. Even when I finished my studies and became a teacher at school, in a high school where I was teaching, nobody ever made me feel that I wasn't sort of equal to everybody else.
So you spoke Greek at home?
We spoke Greek at home, yes, but we lived on a farm. The nearest school was 40 miles away.
How did you do it?
We had to be boarders. So that meant you were at home only for 3 weeks in April, May, 3 weeks in September, and 6 weeks in December. The rest of the time you were in school. You were not speaking Greek, you were speaking English. The nuns, in fact, discouraged the speaking of foreign language. I could have learned Portuguese from the Portuguese children, but they were always fined if they spoke Portuguese. You are here to learn English, the nuns would say. So the Greek came up a bit short. You cannot learn Greek from your parents as much as you should do if you're not at home with your parents. It was a disadvantage in that regard. Because if you're educated in a different language, we not only had a generation gap with our parents, we had a cultural gap with our parents. I read a book recently which was written by a Zimbabwean woman, and she said in that book, it was an education reading it because she was speaking about what happens to the Shona people. They desire to be educated. The language of education was English, and they end up being anglicized. The Englishness creeps into their culture. And the same thing happened to us. We think like English people. We don't think like Greek people. Although the Greek people now, of course, with the EU and everything, they are broadening their attitudes. But we are basically English.
And do you think your parents got along well, having English as a second language?
Well, if you're a farmer, you're not necessarily speaking English. You need to speak to your crew of workers. I don't know to what extent my father learned Shona. In the house, we came up a bit short because I think the original pioneers who came, they came from South Africa. Obviously, they came to Bulawayo first because they made a deal with the Mutare people about proceeding into the country. And I think that the language we spoke was based on Zulu. It had nothing to do with Shona. Mm-hmm. Because whenever I was in South Africa, I could clearly understand people who had the foresight, like my brother, when he got a son, and there was a carer for a child, he said, you will not speak English to him, you will speak Shona to him, as if he's your own child. And she did. And when he spoke to the woman who looked after him, I couldn't understand a word they said, which was a very good basis for him for later.
And you said that by 1910 is when your mother's father came, 1924.
Yes.
So there was a wave of immigration, Greeks coming into the country.
People were coming already.
And how many people who were living in Zimbabwe back then and are living maybe in Zimbabwe today?
I think that when we had the maximum number of Greeks here, there must have been 5,000. Mm-hmm. Whether they were in the city or whether most of them were in the city here. A lot of them had little shops in outlying country areas, a little store where you could buy khaki trousers or meal or sugar or whatever, that kind of business.
And today, what do you think?
Well, today we've got all kinds of professional people because the younger children were all got an English education, went off to universities. We've had doctors and dentists and other professional people, lawyers.
And are the young people still in Zimbabwe or are young people leaving?
I think basically people who had property got foundation in bricks. The people who came later, in the latter years, before independence, they left and went back to Greece. People who had foundations here in property chose to stay. But their children, once they went out to study, if they studied in South Africa, or if they studied in Australia or in England, they found work there and emigrated.
So the number of Greeks in Zimbabwe is declining?
It's declining, I would say, yes, it's declining.
Would you say the community has changed from when you were working until now?
The community has become very thin because when I first started working, I was astonished at the number of people who could afford to have parties in their homes. I don't know if I just happened to come when everyone had been married for 25 years, but there was a celebration in this house and 2 weeks later and another one in that house and then in that house. And then, of course, at the end of Federation, all that kind of petered out a little bit. Maybe there's the 25-year period had finished for all the people who had married together. It was strange how things happened. The year I turned 21, in a little town like Mutare, there were 21 21st birthday parties. So I said to myself, all these ladies must have been pregnant in 1933. How did that happen? If you are reading English literature, you start thinking their mentality. Somewhere down the line, reading magazines in English, I came to the conclusion, and I must have read it, it's dishonest to marry somebody that you don't love. It's dishonest to marry somebody you don't love. In Greek, that is not so. It's not modest to be looking around and falling in love. Not if you're old-fashioned, if you had old parents. Maybe they fall in love now. But it was sort of frowned upon to be creating a new romance and stuff like that. People were expecting to just be introduced, like my parents were married. Somebody said to my father, "You need a wife." And he said, "Oh, there's a Kifaloniti up there. He brought a family, let's go and look." My mother was the one who was older. He looked her over, he said, "Okay, she'll do." She had a look, she said, "Okay, he mustn't be stupid and he mustn't be a drunk." They said, no, he's all right. That's fine, you can get married and get acquainted. Not the way to go about it. Here in Zimbabwe, the young people are just getting on with their lives, but all along, we have had the difficulty where the English girls were free to go out with anybody they wanted to go out with. The Greek girls, especially not of my vintage, were allowed to go anywhere on a date with anybody. You did not go out with anybody at all not even with a colleague and have a cup of coffee in a restaurant. No, that was absolutely not. So there are many, many people. If you go to our church function, you'll see a whole lot of little blonde Greeks. They've all got English mothers. Lots and lots of people married other girls, English girls, not Greek girls. Because they had the advantage of being able to go out with a young man. He was able to take out an English girl. He was not allowed to take Mr. Greek fellow's daughter out, so he took out an English girl and eventually married her. As I say, we're getting thinner on the ground now, and our church it's not thriving as it should have been.
It's a Greek Orthodox church.
The Greek Orthodox Church has taken care to teach our religion to the people of Zimbabwe. And they have established churches in Waterfalls and one of the other suburbs. So there are lots of Zimbabweans who are Orthodox now.
And the Greek community, I see, is very active, it's very visible. There are products, especially in food, like cheese and dips.
A lot of women make a very good living out of that.
Yeah, that
so
I've seen.
Very good at that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then there's the Greek school, the Hellenic school.
The Hellenic school is getting to be absolutely enormous now. And it's even got its own church on its grounds. And all kinds of activities go on there, like celebration luncheons, like for when we're celebrating independence from the Ottoman Empire. And we celebrate, of course, when we said no to Mussolini, who wanted to just stroll into Greece and work through.
So the Greek community is very visible. So the Greek school, there's a church. You can learn Greek there. The students have the option to learn Greek if they want it. I know there's a teacher there. There's stuff from the embassy. I know there was a Palm Sunday celebration.
It was all done by the Greek community and the church, of course, yes.
Tess, when you go to Greece, how is it for you?
When I first went to Greece, I was always in a difficult position because I didn't speak Greek well enough. And the Greeks there, like every country, they think they're the most intelligent people in the world. The Germans think that, the Italians think that, I'm sure the Portuguese think that, everybody thinks that. And they tend to look down your nose if you don't speak Greek properly.
Yeah.
But of course, the quickest way to learn it is to go there. When you hear something named correctly by your relative, you recognize the word at once and say, that's the right way to put it. Because we used to say, put it in the plug. We didn't know what a plug was. We knew the English word for plug. Our own parents were using the word plug because when they came in 1926, there weren't any electrical plugs.
Yeah, of course.
So when you're introduced to the plug, you learned it by its English name.
So the vocabulary developed over time, of course.
All the time, yes.
So how was that first visit?
My first visit, I was 26 when I first went to Greece. I went with my father. And I met his side of the family. And that was quite an education. I was sitting with one auntie, and she wanted to go through this particular garden. She called it a garden. It was just a bunch of trees, and it had a bench on it. Anyway, and we were in Salonika.
Where is that?
Salonika is the second largest city of Greece.
Yeah.
Thessaloniki, do you know by that?
Thessaloniki, that name I know.
You know that name?
Yeah, that name I know, okay.
The English people call it Salonika.
Okay.
Thessaloniki is correct, that's the Greek name of it, yes. It's a huge city, And they got independence from the Turks only in 1912, not in 1821, as the rest of us celebrate.
So you went for the first time to Salonika
To
when you were 26?
Salonika, yes, and we were expecting we went, first of all, we went by train. Perhaps I should, if you've got time, I'd like to backtrack. My dad and I set off for Greece. We did not fly. This was 1959. We went to Beira by car. We boarded a ship.
Beira, Mozambique.
Yes, we got on a ship, and we took a cruise in Beira. We got off at Lorenzo Marx, as we used to call it, and we got off and went and visited the museum. We went past the South African ports, and we came. I'm trying to remember them now. I'm having a senior moment. We came to, anyway, Port Elizabeth was one of them. We saw a snake park in one of those, and East London, and then we came to Cape Town. And we had to wait in Cape Town for 3 days because they had shipped copper on our ship and hadn't packed it properly. And it was rolling around loose in the hold, which was very dangerous. So they had to stop and repack it. And then we sailed up to London. We spent a week in London and saw TV for the first time in our lives. And then we went across to France, to Paris for a week. And then to get to Salonika, we took the Orient Express from Paris. And they said, no, you're not going to go first class. It's too expensive. It's cheaper to fly. Just go second class. Well, we thought we could do that because you could go second class on the railways here and still have a bunk to sleep on. Mm-hmm. But you didn't do that on the Orient Express. If you went second class, you went sitting up all the way. And this was what happened to us. And we were 2 nights and 3 days getting to Salonika. But it was very, very interesting, especially because it was May and the days were very long. And when we came to Italy, we could see lakes and mountains and stuff. Late into the night, it was still daylight. It was a wonderful trip, an absolutely wonderful trip.
I remember that when I went with students to Germany for the first time, they were making videos of themselves. They were saying, it's 9 p.m., because the sun, it was summer, so the sun is still shining.
At light at 11, you just sort of see out. I used to read these little women's magazines, and they'd had dinner and played tennis after dinner, and I thought, that's stupid. How can you play tennis after dinner? Here the sun sets, and that's it.
And did you feel back then, when you were 26, a difference between yourself being brought up in Africa?
One of the big surprises that I got was that my father was very much more old-fashioned than his brother, who had never left Greece. Because when he left Greece, he did not come from Athens. He did not come from the capital of Kefalonia. He came from his own island. He found himself in a strange land where they spoke a strange language, and that is not our custom. We are maintaining our customs. But he maintained his customs of 1924. His brother, in the meantime, who lived in Greece, had been proceeding with Greece. They'd gone through a war. They'd gone through a civil war. They went through the march of time, and they had very much more modern ideas than my father had. That was something that surprised me, very much so.
I've heard that actually from a lot of people that are children of migrants like myself as well. With the cuisine that my mother also was cooking, it's quite traditional. When I go to Poland, her sister, she's not cooking like this anymore. it's
They don't do that
anymore because they, as you say, proceed. And also from Turkish friends my age, they also said, oh, my cousins, they wear all these clothes or they go out into clubs. My friends that were, their parents were from Turkey, they did not have that freedom. Did you go to Greece after that?
many times. Every time I had long leave, I went to Greece. And I was very impressed by the changes in Greece. First of all, I was impressed by the height of the new young people. And when I first went to Greece, they all looked rather short to me because we had been raised on beef here. They had gone through a very bad time during the war. The next time I went, the tourism had woken up to the idea of tourism. Money was coming in, and people were eating better and growing tall. And then you suddenly would see great big, tall young men, you know, and they would be playing volleyball and stuff like that, and needing to be able to throw balls into the right place and make a name for themselves. They came into sport. Sport was not important before. You would see a school and their playground was about the size of my garden here in Harare. It was not there were no sporting facilities for them in the old days when I first went to Greece. Mm-hmm. They just went to school to learn to read and write.
Mm. So this podcast is called Zimlove. Zimlove describes a feeling about this place. How would you describe what Zimlove is for you?
It's home. It's where we belong. The most astonishing thing, we would be traveling to go to South Africa. We'd get on the train and know that it would take us 4 days to get to Grahamstown. You would be on the train, and the minute you crossed the border, you felt a kind of relaxation that you were back home. And when I came back from Greece the first time, my father stayed on a bit. He wanted to go to the agricultural show in Thessaloniki. I had to fly back and get back to my job. And the minute I got off the plane in Nairobi, I wanted to kiss the ground of Africa because I was back home. I have never felt that I belonged in Greece.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Tass. Anastasia. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.